Good afternoon and welcome to this Distinguished Entrepreneurship Series event hosted by the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation here at the Booth School of Business and the University of Chicago. My name is Lucas Peralta and I'm an Associate Director at the Polsky Center, and I'm excited to introduce this event to you. Entrepreneurship is less an industry than a way of thinking about solving tough problems. This, of course, is well aligned with the University of Chicago's commitment to deep inquiry. As such, the entrepreneurial community is getting increasingly strong here at the University of Chicago. Entrepreneurship is now the biggest concentration at the Booth School of Business, and in the last 25 years, hundreds of companies have launched using university resources like the award-winning New Venture Challenge, including Grubhub, Braintree, Simple Mills, Tavala, and many others. In just a moment, you will hear from an innovator whose experiences reflect the entrepreneurial way of thinking and problem solving. The mission of this Distinguished Entrepreneurship Series is to advocate for innovative thinking across industries and fields of studies. We hope it will inspire students, staff, faculty, and the Chicago community to reflect on big problems they experience and give them permission to solve them. Through prominent voices, we hope to expand perspectives on what defines entrepreneurship and innovation. Instrumental to the start of this series has been Chicago Booth alum and serial entrepreneur Manish Kothari. Manish has partnered with the Polsky Center to bring prominent innovators and entrepreneurial voices to our community, and we are grateful for his support. In a minute, he will introduce our guest, Aga Sekalala Jr., but first we have some housekeeping to mention. The event will be recorded and shared on the Polsky On Demand section of our website at polsky.uchicago.edu. Around halfway through the program, we will open the conversation to audience questions. You can submit a question using the Zoom Q&A tool, and we will be reviewing and moderating the questions at that time. With that said, I'd love to introduce and welcome Manish Kothari to introduce our guests. Thank you, Manish.
Thank you, Lucas. I want to thank the folks at the Polsky Center for their support as well, Dean Rajan for hosting today's event, and my friend Ivan, who connected me with today's distinguished speaker, Aga Sekalala. As you all know, entrepreneurial opportunity and talent know no boundaries. It is through this lens that I was very keen to invite a guest from Africa, a continent that represents immense opportunity and an amazing pool of talent. Aga is from Uganda and comes from an entrepreneurial background himself. He has helped build and grow not just one, but two very diverse businesses. He was co-founder and former CEO of Radio Simba, which is one of East Africa's and Uganda's most popular radio stations, and founder and former chair of Ugachick, which is one of the largest poultry businesses in the region. Prior to Ugachick, Aga studied at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, where he received a bachelor's in chemical engineering. Aga has served on the boards of several companies, including KCB Bank, which is Sub-Saharan East Africa's one of Sub-Saharan East African region's top banks, as well as he has served on the boards of the Ugandan Investment Authority and the Ugandan Export Promotion Council. I know that he's a very active mentor to entrepreneurs across Africa, as well as a very active investor. Please join me in welcoming both Aga and Dean Rajan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manish. And Aga, it's really a pleasure to have you today. I want to thank you for taking the time to be with our community and to share your insights.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Rajan.
So maybe we could just start by saying, as Manish mentioned, you've had success with two very different types of ventures. Maybe we can start with Ugachick. Perhaps you could speak about the early founding of it and what made you think that that was a great business opportunity for you to get into.
Thank you, Dean Rajan. Let me first start by thanking Lucas, Manish, and yourself for hosting me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here, and perhaps hopefully we'll be able to share some of my experience and pass on whatever knowledge I might have acquired over the years. The early founding of Ugachick comes from most businesses in this part of the world are very nascent. They're very young and small. They start out largely as import substitution, and we have in the past, maybe in the 80s, where breeding stock always used to be imported from Europe, from Asia, and from more developed countries, maybe like South Africa. The idea was that we could be produced locally because it was being air freighted in, and these are small, very young animals. They've been birds. They've just hatched, and they're 1 day old. So the idea was that breeding stock would be bred in country, and the hatchery would be local, and that would enable us to be closer to the customer. So this is really mostly, as you be said, an import substitution play. And the idea is that you bring the product, you manufacture the product, and the product doesn't come from as far, so it's a better quality product to the customer. And it's also a product that, because of the size of the market and the GDP per capita, is initially a product that is not as chicken is not, the consumption is still, even today, is still very low compared to most developed markets. So this was a new product, and it was a product that we were trying to get engaged in the market and to sell locally. Yes.
And maybe you could speak about some of the sort of early challenges you had as you went through this. Was it very easy? Did it work out exactly as you had thought, or were there lots of difficulties along the way?
When we started this business in now about this time, it's 30 years ago in 1992. First and foremost, the market, we had just come out of a war, and it was a long war for the country, a civil war. And the infrastructure in general was very poor. Everything was very challenging. The product was not very well known, and people's incomes were rather low. So the markets had to be developed. You had to, in addition to teaching people how to use and manage the product and to get more people to use it, you also had to teach the end users how to consume. And it has been an ongoing process whereby we've moved from a product that, for instance, chicken in the late 80s and early 90s in this part of the world was consumed only during the festive season, during Christmas and maybe Easter. And we've been getting people to, understand that it is not a festive meat. They need to eat it more regularly. So there's been a constant growth. So we've been going from at least to try and bring them in to eat it once a month, not only during the peak seasons. Mm-hmm. When we started out, consumption was only at Easter and at Christmas. Mm-hmm. So now we brought them to consume so now we're getting them to consume regularly. So there is a lot of there's a lot of things that you have to do in the market, because the market in most of these cases is not very developed.
And when you think about like expansion outside of Uganda into other countries nearby, how did that play out?
Well, we have mostly been working with partners. The poultry business is very localized in terms of the region and transportation. What we tend to work with is we've worked with a partner, for instance, in Rwanda, who a bit of cooperation in terms of technical cooperation, and then they might buy some products which we send to them. But business in the region tends not to be, it's got its bumps and challenges. We've had, in the last couple of years, one of the challenges has been, we've had a closed border because of relations. So for 2 years, our borders have been closed. So while we've got a partner, we've had to encourage the partner to find alternate sources because we were unable to provide product for them. Similarly to our border to the east, which is on the Kenyan side, we would normally serve the people in the region closer to Uganda. But sometimes borders are closed. Sometimes we have trade barriers, because remember, these are different countries, and they tend to have each one has its own interests. So non-tariff barriers is a very common problem that we have to deal with.
And I know that this you've worked on Ugachick with your father. What was that like? What have been sort of your experiences of managing it as a family?
Family business has its interesting challenges, twists and turns, but lots of benefits. I'm fortunate. I consider myself quite lucky. My father has got a lot of experience working in the country. He's got lots of relationships. He also likes to work a lot with what we call small scale farmers and outgrowers and people in that realm of things. I tend to be, I think, with my engineering background, I like to deal with the production, the factories, the production people, the staff. So we tend to have fairly complementary, or I would say different areas of interest. And my father was very comfortable, and gave me quite a bit of latitude to allow me to do the areas that I work on, and he sort of like stayed with the areas that he worked in until the time came for his semi-retirement. So now he does a little bit less, and he has slowly been handing over the reins of the business.
So one thing, particularly the US audiences may not be as aware of, is that in most places outside the US, family businesses tend to be kind of the more dominant, form of business. If you look at Africa, Latin America, Asia, maybe you could speak a little bit about that. Why do you think that is? What is it that makes sort of that dynamic work in those economies?
Naturally, I think one of the things that tends to also happen is in developing markets is talent, and managerial talent tends to be not as common or not as available and not as prevalent as it is in more developed markets. So family tends to be very easy to work with in terms of trust and loyalty, and being able to make long-term plans with as talent and as people to work with. So really for team purposes. Also because of the nature of the market, once if a family is a family that is involved in business, it tends to be something where you accumulate both capital, relationships, networks, and quite a number of things. So these groups tend to be the ones that are the go-to when even when external players want to come into the market, they will partner with them. And so because it's where the numbers are, it's where the reputation is, it becomes a safe bet, really.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for the great answer. You mentioned capital. So maybe could you speak a little bit, Aga, about how did you think about sort of raising money when you started and when you're expanding? Does it come from family? What sources do you usually go to?
Interesting. I think that it is various. I think family has been a source of some of what we would call the core capital. Mm-hmm. When we did the project, when we did the Ugachick project, it was a much bigger in terms of size compared to the businesses we had at the time. We worked with we had a foreign investor. He was a German, and he was the majority shareholder of the business. He had a runway time of about 5 years where he wanted to build the business up to a certain size and sell it. And at his exit, he sold the business back to us, and we bought it back. So naturally, it's the same thing. It's the family, and it is the local groups that are able to go to the banks to be able to purchase and get the loans and be able to buy out your partners in cases like this.
And the other really key element you mentioned was talent. how do you find, has talent been developing? Do you feel like you're able to now go and recruit great people to come in, or is that still sort of an issue?
There has been a big change. There's been a change in the 32 years that I have been working. I must add, 30 years ago, it was very difficult to attract even half reasonable talent to the country. One, infrastructure, medical facilities, schools, a lot of things were in a fairly low state. But over the years, things have improved. One, Ugandans, the Ugandans have been upskilling quite a bit, going to universities abroad. They have been improving in terms of skills, local schools, local training institutes. So there has been a big change, but I think it has not been in tandem with the growth of, the country has, for many of the 30 years has, I would say for maybe 12 or 15 of these years has always had double-digit growth. So we are still not able to keep up, but we found ourselves now where we can actually attract talent. I can tap into talent in South Africa. I can tap into talent in Zimbabwe. I can tap into the region where people don't find it to be such a big change from where they've been. People from Egypt, people from Kenya, they will not mind coming to live in Uganda because things have changed and developed. So yes, there's been a big improvement within the local talent pool. And now the situation has become much more conducive to attract external talent. And also now we've got also a very big pool of Ugandans who studied abroad. And they work in the US, they work in all the big institutions, the big banks. And, even we've done quite a number of projects where we put out to get certain talent, and we would call on Ugandans in the diaspora, and we're always able to get 2 or 3 people to show up for the interviews.
Are the younger people in particular more interested in entrepreneurship, do you think, as opposed to going and working in a bank or the corporates, which used to be kind of what was their dream job?
It's, I guess, I mean, the entrepreneurship is not easy. We've got a much bigger pool of young people today who are in innovation villages, who are in incubation centers. So when you walk into these places, they are bustling with life. People are trying to do this and trying to build apps and trying to build things that they can sell to the local communities. There is also quite a lot in the services sector, people trying to do different things. So there's quite a bit of work around entrepreneurship. There is also quite a lot, and some of the opportunities in the corporate are also quite good. So I think that there is always still that split. There are people who end up in corporate, there are people who do consulting, there are people who do banking. And then there are also people who are trying out their luck in the entrepreneurship sphere.
Let's talk about Radio Simba, which has been another huge success. What was the sort of driving force behind that? Why did you feel that was an area that you wanted to get into?
It's an interesting story, but when I finished my university, my engineering degree, I worked with the family for about 7 years, and at some point I decided to go on what I thought of as a sabbatical. It also turned out that it was also quite an opportunity for me to step back and actually start to look at the family business from a different point of view. I took on more of a governance role. I sat on the boards of the companies as opposed to the day-to-day management. By that point in time, we had sort of restructured the businesses, put in professional management, and it was then time for me to sort of, step back, sit on the board, and I happened to have quite a bit of time. And talking to some friends of mine, it turned out that, Uganda was in the middle of liberalizing our airwaves. We had, for many years, operated with limited only national broadcasters. So the government had finally agreed that there could be commercial, advertising run radio. And to many people, the opportunity just didn't seem to make any sense, or how would they survive? Where would the money come from? There were just not that many advertisers. But living in the West, you've seen, I had seen that, it was a natural thing. As long as you got the audiences, the companies, the beverage companies, the Pepsis, the Cokes would sooner or later have to come to you and advertise. So we chanced it, and with a partnership with a friend of mine who is also still my mentor, but who we started the business. And we got a license. We applied for a license from government, and we were granted a license. At the time, it was only 5 licenses for the whole country, and we were given one of the 5 licenses. And there was no bid, or there was no competition. I think it was a first come, first serve, and there was a limited pool. So it was, you come in, you apply, and you get the license. So eventually we got the license, and then we went out on a hunt, and I looked out for about 3 other investors to find the funds to buy the equipment and to set up the studio and the business and to get the business rolling. So I co-opted a few other investors. I set up an open shop, and I said, look, if those who are interested, those of friends of mine who are interested, and 3 people came to the table in addition to my mentor, and we started the business in 95. We started 95, 96. We set it up. We had it on air, and I operated and ran the business until 2010, when I had built up a team. And by that point in time, my father was in the process of retiring, and he wanted a little bit of runway, 4 to 5 years, to be able to step away from business and sort of let go. So we agreed with him that I would step away from the commercial radio business and go back to running the family businesses on a day-to-day basis. So that's really how it's worked out. The business of the radio grew quite at one point in time. We had radio stations between Kampala all the way into Kenya. We had 8 radios in Kenyan territory. We had two different brands here in Uganda. But when the time came to hand over the business to the professional team to run, we consolidated, and I sold the properties that I had in Kenya, and I decided to settle for the business, which was doing very well in Uganda, and it was generating good cash flows, and decided to leave, let that one be the one to run. And I kept one small brand in Uganda, another brand in Uganda, and sell off the Kenyan ones.
What do you see as sort of the future of the sort of radio and media sort of companies largely in Africa?
I think it's quite precarious. It's a real tricky one. We've been, I guess, for the last 1 or 2, 3 years, also during the lockdown, and also during all this time, we've sort of really been racking our brains about what it is. Some of our competitors have, opted to go to invest more. So they dug in a bit deeper and went towards TV. We've gone towards a bit of digital. So we've got internet radio, we've got TikTok channels, you've got YouTube, we've got that sort of thing is the direction we've taken. The verdict is not out. We still know that a lot of people, still have a radio set. Radios are very cheap. $5, somebody has a radio. People have radios on their phone. So a Ugandan mobile phone, which might not be the case for many of the people listening in, a Ugandan mobile phone, normally a Chinese set, will also have a radio. On it, and so people tune into their radios while they're at work, and when they're at home, they can tune into the radio. So it is still a very convenient way to get the messages and to get the advertising out. The question is, will it survive? Will it survive the next shift in digital communication? Honestly, Dean Rajan, I don't have an honest answer. I am what if I knew, I would be right there where the answer was.
Okay. So you had mentioned that you came to the US to study. You got your engineering degree at the University of New Mexico. Why did you do that? What was the experience like? And do you feel like that had something to do with your decision to go into a career in entrepreneurship?
Yes, I'm born to an entrepreneurial family, but the time when I was doing my upper what I would call high school schooling, the country was quite unstable, and so it was very difficult for me to do university, and so the family thought it best that I take on my undergrad in the US. I came to live in the US. It was a great experience. It was quite eye-opening, a lot of things that you get to see and learn. And like you just asked in the previous question, you get exposure into things that might appear impossible. You get to see them, in real life working. And that has been very good and fortunate. But to answer your question, the experience and coming to the US is something we've continued. For instance, in our family, my children, my two of my sons have all come to this. One is in his senior year at UC Berkeley. He's getting his undergrad degree in data science, and we've continued on because we believe it gives you an exposure, builds you a network of people that come from different parts of the world. As the world becomes smaller, you have more contacts, more people that you know around the world, from whom you can learn, from whom you can work together, and from whom you can coordinate with.
So you were an engineer. You studied engineering as an undergrad.
Yes.
Any thoughts on how that has affected the way you think about business problems that you have faced in your career?
To be honest, Dean Rajan, I think there's some good, and I think that there is some bad. And I'll start with some of the bad things, and then perhaps maybe I'll touch on the good things. I think on what I think maybe could be the limitations, just trying to think about it honestly. Engineering tends to be a study with a big emphasis on limits. You sort of think about limits and tolerances and what are your extreme positions, and you tend to want to work within a certain realm of possibility. That tends to be something that we work with quite a lot as engineers, and it does shape the way you think and the way you think about problems that face you. And personally, a lot of times opportunity might present itself, and you look at it and you quickly realize your engineering mind is not really able to wrap itself around really what is the possibility, because of these limits that engineers tend to set on themselves because of the way we work. But the good thing is that ultimately, at the end of the day, engineering just opens you up to the possibility and the confirmation and affirmation that everything normally has some science to it. And if there is some science, there is something very basic at the very basic to it. Even if it is business, there is something basic happening. I mean, when I hatch a chick, it's an egg. And it is a fertile egg, and then it matures, and it has to be fertile. It has to have the right conditions, the right temperature, the right humidity. All that is science. And once you understand that, it ceases to be a mystery, and you understand the basics of whatever process that you choose to do. And also that the other thing is the freedom to be able to dig into the numbers. I mean, the numbers are so important in business. And it tends to be that the engineering background gives you that freedom to just dig in and say, what is behind these numbers? And you learn how to read them, and you learn how to question, and you learn how to interrogate them. And you say, where does this come from? And you feel free to ask questions and to say, well, I answer this question like I don't know. And this has served me well, because I think that I'm always ready to learn. And I think that that's one of the things about that whole engineering, the study of engineering is one where you need to be ready to learn something, and you need to accept you don't know everything, and you're ready to sort of pick it up from where you've picked it up, and try and make the best of it.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer. Thank you very much. You spoke about with the radio business, some of the issues that you see. As Manish mentioned, you're also an investor. What are areas that you think are ripe for sort of growth or explosive growth in Africa over the next 10, 20 years?
I think that Africa in general, I mean, from where I sit, I think that Africans and a large bulk of the population will remain have still low incomes, and they are still aspiring for the basics. Unlike a lot of the people that might be listening in this evening, a lot of the majority of the people around me are still trying to work hard to achieve, the 2 meals a day. They're trying to make sure that they've got clean water, trying to make sure that they've got accommodation. A rental is good enough. They also would like to have their own accommodation, so they would like to have their own housing. So really, at the moment, the aspirations of the bulk of the African population is on the basics. So there is quite a lot of opportunity on just basic things. People, in the years that I've been here, people have been learning how to eat chicken a little bit more than they were eating it 30 years ago. In the time that I have graduated, I have seen people consume a little bit more wheat, a little bit more bread, a little bit more wheat products. There's plenty of other wheat products that we consume around here, but certainly you can see that the aspiration is still around food, juices, beverages, and you can see that there is still quite a lot of scope in the basics, even just the basics. Communications, for instance, we've got 2 big communications companies here, and they've floated as billion-dollar companies. That was unheard of or unthinkable a few years ago, but it's largely because there are large numbers. People want to communicate. And so the question is, what are the services that could be built underneath? Those will make a lot of money for a lot of people. Fintech, being able to get these people to have financial services. These are all very, very, very interesting areas, but there are big chances, big risks, and there'll be big payoffs for those who get it right.
Let me ask one more question and then turn it to Lucas. We have a bunch of questions from the audience, and that is, you mentioned the lockdowns, Aga. The pandemic, what has the impact been, and how do you think it's going to affect things sort of going forward?
In this part of the world, the interesting thing is the pandemic we've not had large number of cases in terms of sick and hospital. We've had some deaths, some prominent deaths. Yes, we've had members, family, friends that we've lost during this COVID-19. But the bigger impact has come from the mitigation measures. The lockdowns have been very hard on small and medium-sized enterprises. The small and medium-sized enterprises have seen shrinkage. We've had, for instance, schools have been out because it took a long time to get the teachers and to get the community vaccinated enough to give a bit more comfort to government. The governments are also very cautious because large numbers of deaths don't stem very well for stability. And so the chance was very difficult to take those kinds of chances. Our schools have been out more or less for the greater part of 2 years. Now a lot of schools are privately owned enterprises. The schools, the government can't provide enough education for all the students. So these schools have been closed. If you have a school basically with infrastructure, computers, networks, and you're closed for 2 years, no students, no school fees, no collection at all, you're running on zero, it is really tough. You go out of business. You basically bust at the end of 2 years if you still have the school, if you had loans. So it has been really tough, and we we've actually seen a shrinkage in terms of consumption of products. We're seeing people have less money to spend. So it's gonna be a long, slow recovery, and hopefully that we no longer have to deal with. Hopefully we don't have to do any more mitigation measures, because a third one will really cripple our society and our business environment, because we don't have a social safety net. We're not able to give people $1,000 check in the mail, so that at least they can continue to consume and spend and maybe do whatever they need to survive. So the community and the society is really taking it. It's really been very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Aga. Lucas.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you, Dean, for the questions that you asked. That was incredible. I have some questions from the audience, and I wanted to say that there are quite a few questions. So we are likely to not get through all of them, but I will do my best to find a cross-section that represents some of the interests of the audience. Aga, you have learned a lot in your 30-year plus career as an entrepreneur and a serial entrepreneur and an investor. If you were to go back to when you first started Ugachick, what would you have done differently? What was a lesson you wish you had learned earlier in your career?
I think that I would have gone with a stronger teams fairly earlier on, because I think as capacity or as the markets grow, you find yourself stretched as an entrepreneur. And I think that one of the things that I would have liked to do more of is have stronger teams. They tend to be very expensive, but I think that I would have considered my teams and managerial knowledge and that sphere of things more as a capital investment, as opposed to thinking about it as an operating cost. And on some of these, I would go back. If I were to go back, I would invest more. I'd invest more on those fronts of in that area.
Thank you. Very interesting. We've got a question from a student who says that they'd love to hear more about how you find inspiration for new businesses or ideas in your day-to-day. How do you think about new problems, and how do you, come up with new ideas?
The key focus that we have, we tend to want people who are solving problems, and most of the time problems that we also have as a business. Is it a challenge? Is it a challenge in how we make payments? Is it a challenge in how we process certain raw materials to be able to use them more efficiently? Is it a challenge in how we store raw materials that we're using in our production process? Is it and we try to see if that is in the sphere, in the other areas, maybe some that might not be directly related to our businesses, but maybe in the other businesses that are in the country. If you're solving a good and a big problem that I think you can sort of make you sort of have traction, then it tends to be very interesting to invest in, and we would look at ventures like that.
Awesome. So speaking about ventures you invest in, how do you evaluate startups and founders in your investments? Like, what are some of the examples of companies you've invested in, and what are the traits that you look for in those companies or in those founders?
I'll speak to a founder I was having a chat with today, with whom we've invested in their business. It's a tourism business, and essentially They're running a tourism on the lake boat service in one of the national parks. So basically, they've got a boat on which there are sundowners, and you can have private functions, but it normally would carry tourists to go upstream on the river to take a look at these wild animals while they're water-based. And the investor is very good at tourism. He's very passionate about the whole tourism thing. He's involved in tourism. He's got quite a bit of skin in the game. He's got a lodge, and he's also got a lease on another lodge. So he's got the contacts. He's been abroad. He understands the business, and he understands the big picture. And I think I find myself very comfortable to invest in him because he knows what he's doing. And I don't need to worry about, he's got a good team. When I look at his team, they know what they're doing. They know how to handle the tourists from the airport all the way into the national parks. We also would work with younger teams, which we mentor and try and, teams who are doing things in communication, as long as they've got, so they've got unique ideas, sometimes of which we can leverage and maybe perhaps even use within our own businesses. That tends to be of interest to us, and we know that we can share that with other businesses, other colleagues of ours in other sectors. So we know that the business has a bit of traction.
Awesome. So this question is not necessarily focused on Uganda necessarily, but what do you think are the key trends in agribusiness moving forward generally? How do you think developments in agriculture technology or business models are going to create new opportunities in communities or economies?
I'm not sure really what I might not have a very specific answer for that. In terms of, I think we've in Uganda we are in the middle of a transition in terms of, and this is also very common in most parts of Africa, where you're moving from what we look at as smallholder agriculture, and you're moving medium-sized agriculture. So you have some areas where you have consolidation and movement to commercial agriculture, and then you have some areas where we're moving from more profitable crops to more profitable crops. So it's still an aspect. It's a lot about commercial and trying to make the smallholder and the farmers make a little bit more money and increase their income and to fit in with increasing GDP per capita. That's really the trend that the big trend that we have here. But certainly there will be more than that.
Okay, so there's a student or an attendee here who is trying to start a business back home in Ethiopia, but is experiencing trouble negotiating trust between actors and is facing a lot of deep-seated mistrust of foreign actors, and realizing that certain KPIs that are really common in Western businesses just don't translate to Africa. Have you faced some of those issues in your businesses? And do you have any advice for her on how she kind of might negotiate these trends?
Yeah, I think within some communities, developing trust can be a big challenge, especially if you're seen as an outsider versus an insider. And some societies and some communities tend to be insular, and it might be difficult. But the key is always to still keep on digging to find somebody with whom a link can be created. There's always people who have a stronger, more trusted within the community. So it's about finding that one person who can create a link between them and the target where they're looking to be. And even I have over the years been to Ethiopia many times. there is always there is always matchmakers, especially if you spend a bit more time with I would call them they used to call them the big four, the big four accounting firms. That kind of place is always a good source for matchmaking in terms of finding the right partner who might fit with you. And it's always been a good source. It's always been a good source of at least being able to find the right match on a local partner. And sometimes it does take a bit of time. It is not a given that you will find one instantly. But I think you've got to, if you want to do business in most of these parts of the world, you need to invest more time. And in some countries, actually, it takes a much longer time. It might take you 2 or 3 times longer in Kenya than it will take you to do it in Uganda.
Okay, very interesting. Here's another question. Family businesses sometimes have top-down decision-making. Has it been easy for you to delegate decision-making in your companies? And how did you kind of accomplish that culturally in your businesses?
Our businesses are certainly, I mean, across from generation to from my father's style of business is different from my own style of business. I have a more diverse team of people, and they have a lot more autonomy than the team that worked with my father when he ran the business. So I think it's also it's partly a function of time, a function of the type of people that you bring on board also. It's difficult to work with a professional team and not give them a little bit of autonomy to be able to work, in my view. So I think there is a limit to top-down decision making, but certainly there will be crucial. There sometimes are very crucial decisions which might remain in certain places, but this would be the same for even big corporates. Would be very similar.
Okay. Here's a good question. What would you say have been the biggest challenges that you faced in scaling these ideas, specifically in the face of policy decisions or restrictions being made by the government? How have you navigated government action, and how have you built relationships with the government to, make your businesses more successful?
I would say one thing that I have pushed for, and in all the businesses that I have done, I would say is to get a certain amount of cooperation with all the competitors, is to put them all together on the same table and deal with issues that concern you all. Maybe perhaps not the ones that where you compete. If you compete for a customer, you compete on price, but on the issue of policy and on the issue of general things that affect you all negatively, you all have to work in associations. And a lot of the times I have found myself having to lead these associations and to get them started. Well, I started what we have, the National Association of Broadcasters. We started one where we have an association of media owners. I chair the Poultry Association of Uganda. I am a member of the Uganda Manufacturers Association. One of the things in this part of the world that you can't be far away from is policy. And one of the ways to do it best is to actually have some form of cohesion amongst all the players in the sector, and to be able to work and speak as a common voice. And at that point in time, it becomes easier to speak to the people who matter, and they also take your voice seriously, because then you have quite a bit of impact.
Very interesting. I've got kind of a fun question here. what books would you recommend, aspiring entrepreneurs read, or what books would you recommend to people who are just interested in learning about African innovation and African economies?
There are a number of books I could, I think if you at the end of the session, if you put up my Twitter handle, I will try and list down a few books that I think are quite good, especially about African entrepreneurs. There are a number of books that have been written that talk a little bit about the African experience, as opposed to just general books that every entrepreneur all around the world. There's some that are unique to Africa, and a couple of those I'll be happy to list them down. I'll be happy to post either on my Twitter or on my LinkedIn a short list of 5 books which I would recommend. That's certainly, if that would work, I'll be happy to do that.
Absolutely. Another fun question. What is your favorite type of music? What kind of music do you listen to?
I listen to all kinds of music. One of the things I do is, I think my time in radio just meant that I had to have a big cornucopia of music that I listen to. I listen to soft rock music. I listen to rock music. I listen to jazz music. I listen to a lot of Afro pop music. Our radio stations were specialists in African music. They played our local music that never got enough play. So basically, one of the things that I would always tell advertisers is, our radio station will never ever play a Mariah Carey song. So maybe that might give you a feel for what we won't do. We will never play a Mariah Carey or a Beyonce song. But I listen to all sorts of music. I listen to Jay-Z. I listen to hip hop music, just to sort of get a feel for what the trends are. And I think it's mostly something, it's a curiosity that I have. I don't like listening to old music, however. I like to listen to new things and new trends. I don't know. It's just something that I think I acquired in my search for trying to listen to the next thing. And it became a hobby, and it became a thing. So I'm always trying to get what is trending, what is new, and I've got a Tidal which keeps on telling me what is new, what has just come out, what is the latest from Nigeria, what's the latest Afro pop, what's the latest in this country, and so I'm always listening to hear if there is something or some new way people will present the music. But I enjoy everything, I must admit.
What's a musician? What's an African or Ugandan musician that people who aren't from Africa should be listening to?
We've got a lot of really talented musicians in Uganda. Uganda has musicians like Bebe Cool, Chameleon. Tanzania has musicians like Diamond Platinum. Nigeria has great musicians like Wizkid. There are plenty of musicians across the continent who are new, young, very fresh, and are quite interesting, innovative, and have an appeal across all all different tastes of music.
Very interesting. Okay, so I've got kind of like one final question that I think is a good one to end on, and then we can wrap this talk up. What is some advice you can give to entrepreneurs generally, but also entrepreneurs who want to start businesses in Africa or businesses internationally in developing economies and markets? What advice do you think that entrepreneurs should internalize?
I think most importantly is for the people listening this evening, they've got to understand that markets in developed economies are large and affluent. They're organized, and they've got good infrastructure, and things work in basically. In Africa and developing markets tend to be small, they tend to be fragmented, they tend to be in what I call different languages, so they are localized. Different areas have different tastes because these markets tend to be small. So there is some form of diametric. They are diametric in nature. You've got to almost think diametrically of how you think about the US, where you think of a market that serves 200 million people, and you have to think about markets where you're talking about 5 million, but maybe 10 or 5 million or something of that nature if you want to serve more small communities. So you've got to remember, you've got to try and think try to get large number of users, but you also have to be thinking most of the people you're working with are at a fairly low income, but there is a lot of growth over time. So you've got to think long term. You also have to think small, think local, and yet try to think. You have to have an idea which has got legs, and you can carry it across many other communities. You also have to think diametrically as opposed to what you think about when you think about the US or Europe. You have to think a little bit differently. You've got to be ready to play in the long term, because clearly these markets take time, and it's a challenge to operate in these markets because there are many, they're small, and they're all very different from a cultural and social economic point of view.
Thank you so much for being here today. That was incredibly interesting and compelling, and I took so many lessons away myself just listening to your experience. So I'm sure that Manish is going to say thank you in just a moment, but I just want to say from the Polsky Center here at the University of Chicago, and as a fellow University of New Mexico alumni, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your perspective, and we are so grateful for your time today.
I want to echo that. Thank you, Lucas, again for all the great questions, and Dean Rajan. But Aga, this was amazing. As always, there's a lot for us to learn. I'd like to request you not only to post the books that you said, but some of these favorite musicians would be nice as well from the various countries. But thank you so much for your time. It was hugely insightful.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you, Dean Rajan. Thank you, Lucas, for organizing. It was good. The questions were quite interesting, and I hope I was able to touch on and shed a little bit more light and help answer some of the things that the audience wanted to know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.